So I have to say that one of the things I've missed since moving to Tucson, besides good bread, I don't think there's really any great bread around here compared to San Francisco sourdough, but what I've missed is being able to interact with young people, because I really, really enjoyed teaching. Everything except grading, that was. So this is an opportunity for me, and I thank you all for being here. I thank Gandhi for inviting me to do this. And I think in the abstract that was sent out, it said something about how this is going to, Linda wants this to be the most valuable hour in your week, okay? But I have no idea how I could make this the most valuable hour in your week. Okay, so I need some ideas from you. A question that if you got that question answered would empower you, because I have two objectives, okay? I'm going to talk about a theory of where things like gender bias occur. You know, where do they come from? You ever asked that? Where did it ever come from? Okay, why am I the way I am, right? And what I want you to do is be able to get into action. Okay, so I'm an action person. All right, the one thing that Gandhi left out that I'm most proud of, by the way, is the founding of an organization called Global Women's Leadership Network. So we weren't just thinking that women all over the world were not getting the opportunities. We started educating people. We have over 200 graduates, mostly from developing countries around the world. And they are doing phenomenal things, particularly with nonprofits, but also entrepreneurial companies. Right? So I don't just want you to know something. I want you to be able to take action, right, for getting something done. Not necessarily about gender diversity, but, you know, thank you all the men who are here, because you have a role to play in gender diversity. And thank you to all the women here, because you have a role to play in gender diversity. Okay? So have I given you enough time to think about why you're really here? You know, what is it that what question could I answer in the next 40 minutes before we get to the quiz that would make this a really valuable time for you? I have all this brain power in here. Oh, okay, I've got a hand.
I was going to say, how can we as almost graduates or nearly graduates make an impact on the world through the lens of gender diversification, but in a true and meaningful way, not politically correct, not stamping our little feet and saying that women's rights, or men are like, you know, jerks. How do you go through and do that?
Okay, so how can we make an impact? I'm just shorthanding it, right? Because otherwise, too many minutes by the time we go by. That would make it worthwhile. I think if all of you could leave here and understand a little bit about how you can have an impact. Yes?
Two things. One is like actionable items, like small things that you could do, like daily, small, actionable things.
Okay.
The other one.
Hold on, I'm just going to put under this daily. Okay?
The one I forgot, so come back to me.
You should never, they'll tell you when you get trained for doing public speaking and PR, you should never say, there are 3 things, or there are 2 things, because you always forget the last one. That's in your training. Yes?
So, entrepreneurship is generally about challenges and taking up new ideas.
Right.
So because we have gone through a lot of sessions that deal with big companies and their prejudice, I am not relating with how entrepreneurship and gender bias impacts it, so there's a correlation with it.
Okay. So how does entrepreneurship, and if I misspell something, it's just because this point, when you get this close to the board, you get dyslexia, and gender diversity. Correlate? I don't know, I'll just use that word. Yes.
I would say, going back to the first question, the last question, how can we as women reduce that gender bias in any company?
Okay. There we go. Not just companies, organizations, right? Communities. It's prevalent everywhere, right? We just look at corporations, organizations. Yes?
So, given the concept of gender bias, sometimes that it's quite prevalent. But even when women get promoted in an organization, they do point out that that happened because she was a lady and they wanted a woman representative. So even when they're qualified and they get it, even that still then it is pointed out. So how do we combat that?
That perception?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good question. All right. So, combat perception of because she was a woman, she is a woman. Somebody once said that we'll know that women have arrived. I can't remember the exact way they stated it. When even women schmucks get promoted. I guess that wasn't that funny. Okay, one more. Anybody? Yes.
Like, it happens that when you have like women and men leading a team, women both work in the same fashion. Both are very like hard on a team, trying to get the things done. But women are being perceived as the bossy ones, and men are being perceived as the go-getters, like action items, get it done, like that kind of stuff. So I feel that perception when women are being perceived as bossy, that tend to impact the community, and we always have that. So there's always like conflict, and you're trying to simmer it down and play according to the rules, and not come across as a bossy person.
So how do you not come across as bossy? Or what's the question?
Basically when men and women, they act in the same way, and they are very action oriented, but women are being perceived as bossy, but men are not. They are perceived as action oriented.
Can I add one more thing?
All right. Hello, how are you?
I guess the one thing I'd like to put in there is, what can we do to empower ourselves as women and people of color? I mean, all these are starting with a negative, and we're all really strong, and we've got all our amazing qualities, and how do we bring that forth in whatever environment we happen to be in?
It's a good question. Actually, I'm going to turn this to the positive, so just hold on. Okay, so I've got my work cut out for me, all right? If you have another one, if you have one of your own, just hold on to it or jot it down, and we'll see whether or not it gets answered sort of peripherally as we go through. Okay, so I want to start by talking about sort of how the world works, right? And this as I go through this, it's only about being human, all right? So it's not nefarious, it's not evil, it's just the way the world works, okay? So I say that I'm just planning my board. So, okay, we think about things in kind of two domains. Okay, so we have action, and we have knowledge and experience. And guess what? These are linked. Right? So you learn something, and maybe you can take a new action. Or you do something, and it works, and what do you do next time?
Do it again.
You do it again. I mean, think about sports, right? So you're playing tennis against someone. I used to be a tennis player. And you win the point, and you say, aha, what am I going to do now? I'm going to make that shot again. Not to the backhand, right? Et cetera. All right? So but that's also the way that other things work, is The knowledge we build up, the experiences we build up shape this. So if you are a successful manager and you are used to hiring people who look just like you and you are successful, what are you going to do? Are you going to take the chance, on hiring someone who is completely different, who there's a diversity of opinion, who really is kind of wild out there? I once wrote, I was a second level manager and I interviewed somebody and the guy was off the wall, right? I said, hire him, he's very, very creative. He's incredibly diverse. Okay, and he was. I mean, he shook things up. But I'm that kind of a person. Not everybody is that kind of a person, okay? So these two things are very, very related. The invisible part of this is actually, it's the whole board, and in fact, it's more than the whole board, it's the whole world. And that's the invisible context that everything appears in. Okay, so how does context really shape your actions and shape your knowledge and shape your experience? Let's take a couple of examples. Let's pretend this is a geology class. And I say, today's lecture is about depression. What are we going to talk about?
The Great Depression, probably.
Like the Grand Canyon? Yeah, okay. If we're in a psychology class and I say depression, what are we going to talk about? An emotional state, yeah, okay. What if we're in, what's the other one? Oh, an economics class. Depression. Great Depression or the recent one, right? Or close to. Okay, the one that I discovered the other day, which was so great. Okay, any of you ever try to lose weight?
It never works.
Nobody around here ever tries to lose weight? Oh, come on. That's not true. Okay, so, I lost weight, and every time that a new number came on, how did I feel?
So happy.
So happy. It was wonderful, right? And now I step on and there's a new number, and unfortunately it's up. How do I feel? It's all in the context, right? It's all in the context. When I saw that number the last time, I was happy. This time I'm not so happy. So context is really, really, really important stuff. And they talk about, by the way, this board should be three-dimensional because they talk about two different kinds of context. And we'll get into more examples. There's one called proximate and one called distal context. Okay, so proximate is the close one. All right, so for instance, you're here at the U of A. And I'm sure there are things when you first came to the U of A that you found were the way the U of A works. Okay, that's a proximate context. This classroom is a proximate context. We know how to behave in this classroom. Do you want to get up and teach? No. You're a student, you sit there, I'm the person doing the lecture. That's a context, that's something that it's the way things are, right? Although there are now things like flipped classrooms that are trying to make that kind of change, okay? So that's the proximate kinds of context. Now the distal one, which is by far the deeper one, and that's why you would need a 3D board, is everything from your past. And actually things like your family, your nationality, your religion. Okay, that's actually the more powerful one. The much more powerful one than even the proximate. We kind of do what's required in the proximate, but that distal one has a big, big bearing on how we operate. So let's look at some of the things that are in the context in the background. Just want to make sure I get them all. Okay, so the context in the background is, okay, so you've got religion, we talked about that one. And we've got family. And we've got country of origin, your country. We've got things like taboos. Okay, most of the time I think we think of taboos as being something that occur in other countries. But we have them here. We just don't realize them. The one that was pointed out to me one day was, how many of you would ever wear the exact same outfit 2 days in a row? What? It depends on whether you have any clean clothes in the...
It's not. It's also if I'm like running around the house in the same outfit, but then I can go out in the same outfit.
No, you couldn't go out. That's the taboo.
Oh, that's the taboo.
Okay, this is where, by the way, that the unconscious bias resides. And all of these things are constantly acting on your actions and your knowledge and your experience. Something from childhood that occurred is still having its effect on how you operate. Right? So I can remember way back in my childhood helping my mom with doing something in the house, and I didn't do it right. Maybe I was 5, 6, 7, I don't know. And she was upset. She didn't mean this when she said it. But she said, you can't do anything right. You're worthless. We say these things. We shouldn't say them to our kids, but we do. That was a shaping moment for me in my life. And then I had to go do everything right. I had to be perfect. And, okay, I had to be very worthwhile. I had to have value wherever I went. It continues today, but I know that's there. And there are times when I say, I'm not going to do that because that's just something that's kind of dictated from my past. In fact, I wouldn't be nearly as successful today if I hadn't given up being perfect. Okay, especially in entrepreneurship. You can't be perfect. As I think it was Guy Kawasaki said, if it's 80% there, ship it. Okay? So, you know, they're just things from your past. These are all shaping you and, you know, keeping you there. So our values, right? We have the values are here. Is everybody getting the idea of this, of the power that context has? Did you know that before? That very, very powerful, that it's mostly the invisible, whether we think it's all here, that shapes our actions. Not very, very different. We also have, and some of this appears as your stories. Do all of you have a story? One, you have many. You don't just have one. You have many stories that really kind of run your life, right? We have paradigms. Okay, give me some of the gender paradigms. What are some of the things that people believe about? Some of them showed up in here, actually. What are some things that some people believe about women? Or about men?
They're not good drivers.
Men are not good drivers. How many of you have ever heard that paradigm? Okay, what else? Girls aren't good at math. What else?
Guys should be the breadwinner, girls should be in the kitchen making sandwiches.
Yes, and people still believe that. So why does a woman's salary start lower than a man's? Because she really shouldn't be there, kind of, right? Or she's going to leave soon, so why would we pay her that much? Okay, she's going to get married and have kids. Even though most of you, here, will not, you'll probably continue working even after you're married, that's still a paradigm and a myth. Myths are there too, right? I mean, most of these paradigms are really not true. Okay, so that's the given. That's what is in the background. Any questions about that concept of context as being a very powerful influence on everything that happens in society and with each of us? So most of the leadership courses that I lead, and some of them are as much as a week-long course and then 10 months of coaching afterwards, is all about shifting the stories that have emanated from all of this. Shifting the moods that occur because of all of that. Okay, trying to shift that. And if as leaders, you can not only shift a context for yourself, right? So something happens, and instead of the normal reaction, you know how to shift it, okay? But if you can shift it for others, then you'll be a real leader, right? If you can shift that with a team. So going back to the one here, right? Where was the one about, I can't find it now, because I've got, there's two, the comfort, you know, how can you shift that conversation about, oh, she's a bossy woman, right? Okay, so let's talk about that for a minute. We're going to talk about how you shift that context, how you consciously shift that context. All right, so we're going to start again by having action and knowledge and experience. Okay, and they're still linked. We're not going to be able to do much about that. I'm going to draw a line here to say, okay, that context is still there, but we're going to build a new one. Okay, so what are ways that we can shift what's happening? How did Gandhi shift India? Before Gandhi, I would bet you could ask many of the then millions, sorry, there's the thing down there, many millions of Indians, and they would be resigned to India always being British. But Gandhi came up with an idea. He came up with a vision. What was that vision? 2 words. Or 3 words. What?
Non-cooperation.
Non-cooperation was a method.
Non-violence.
Non-violence was a method. A free India. Okay, a free India. That then became a concept that all of those things, he took a particular strategy, which was of non-violence. You know, as it was a way to achieve a free India. Okay, the famous one is JFK's and A Man on the Moon. What did JFK set out, right, as his vision for the United States in conjunction with A Man on the Moon?
To be the first.
That's close. We're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade and bring them back. I'm sure that the men who went really were glad that that you know, was added. Okay? And by saying that, he was establishing a time frame that was difficult. And he would have people come in to his office and they would say, well, we don't have the jet fuel that is necessary for a rocket to get, you know, out of the Earth's atmosphere, blah, blah, blah. And he would say, great, you're on the committee dealing with the jet fuel. Okay? You know, I mean, and obviously he had to get Congress to approve funding, and, you know, but he had a vision. So one way to begin to shift, okay, is to have a vision, for instance, of your life. How many of you have thought about, well, I'm going to graduate this year, and in 5 years, I want to be, right? Have you thought out that far? Yes? Okay. But, you know, if you have that, and by the way, it may change on the way, but at least you start to take actions that are consistent with that. You know, another form of a vision, a little bit, and by the way, this doesn't have to be a free India or a man on the moon or whatever. It can just be something that has to do with your life. Okay? Or a project that you're on. When you first start doing a project with a team, and I'm sure you do a lot of team projects, at least they did at Santa Clara, right? You form a vision of what you really want to achieve with that project. When I was leading teams in corporate America, I would create the press release for the end in 9 months or whatever it was, that was a time frame. We would write the press release that we wanted to make happen. And it would have details in there like a quote from the president on blah, 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 right? So there you were setting a context for the whole project. okay? You can also fashion commitments. That's another form in some ways. You can get committed to something. The one that I like from my personal life, my mother at one point in time she lived in LA and I lived in San Francisco, and I was going down just about every other week, flying down in order to take care of an emergency because she just landed in the hospital. And she had a lot of pain. And I made a commitment one day that I was going to make the rest of her life pain-free. I had no idea how I was going to do that, but I knew it was something I wanted to do. So I called up my niece who lived down there and my brother, and we started doing things like, let's take her to acupuncture. Let's see if that helps the back. Okay, that didn't help the back. Why don't we, we took every remedy, we did all of that. On one of my visits down there, I noticed that the home that she lived in, she was the last person to go to this home where they had 24-hour care in a small house, and they hadn't even made a place for her on the sofa to watch TV. They were cliquey, right, etc. And I just said, she's not going to live there anymore. And I found her a brand new retirement home built by the division of GE, and I furnished the little apartment she had with white furniture and stuff. Okay, the day she moved in, she said, this is like living in my dollhouse from my childhood. Okay? And I stopped having to go to LA all the time for emergency medical stuff because she was happy there. Okay? I made that commitment. I know that changed her life. Commitments are very, very important because they draw action from them. If you want something to happen, get committed to it. Speak it widely. I had a vision for that Global Women's Leadership Network standing in a stream in 1996 south of San Francisco, just getting quiet. I was coming home from a terrible day, and I stood there and I got this picture of women from all over the world dressed in native costumes who were learning about leadership and then being held together by the internet. Now, it was early internet days, okay? It took me 8 years. I talked to people. Every time that I could find somebody who would listen, I would talk about this vision of what we could be doing with women from around the world. So you have to speak these visions. You have to speak these commitments widely. Okay? You also, wrong one, you also can base this on what you really care about. If you are really deeply connected with what you care about, and it doesn't have to be a nonprofit thing. It can be, I'm passionate about data analytics. Right? What I care about right now is really being one of the best analysts on data analytics for a bank in Tucson. But if that's what you really care about, okay, then that will shape your actions. It'll shape new actions than you had before. There's a couple of other secret things that actually affect this whole context picture. One is how you listen. Believe it or not, you can shift how you listen. And you talk about how do you get people around you to cooperate? You start listening to them. Most people speak loudly because nobody is listening. Right? How you listen. So how do you listen to that person on your team who you really maybe don't like and you think is a pain in the neck? Think about that. How do you listen to that person? Anybody see how they listen to that person? Not much real listening there, right? Okay, now you're at the union and you're sitting with your best friend. How do you listen to your best friend? What if you brought that listening to a lot more people? The way that you listen. The fact that you don't jump in, that you're not thinking about what you're going to say. You're really trying to hear what that person is saying. That's a big deal. That can shift mountains. That's how I did a $2 billion turnaround. I listened to other people. So there was a fellow in this big company who had 2/3 of the company reporting to him. And I thought that he was nuts. I'll use that term. It was probably stronger than that. And he wasn't strategic and blah, 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 blah. I had all the reasons to. He didn't support me in doing this. You know, he was against me. Okay? I said, okay, I am going to unilaterally shift my listening for him. So I made an appointment with him. I went in and I asked him what he thought we needed to do in order to get this turnaround going. Right? He gave me a list of things that he thought were important. I went and helped to get those done. We turned the ship. He was only one example of that. But I tell you, I could not have done a $2 billion turnaround if I had continued to listen that he was not on my side, my enemy. And basically, I thought he was my enemy in the company, and it was far from the truth. It was my interpretation. So how you listen is really important. What questions you ask. How many of you, okay, you're going into a team meeting. How many of you sit down as the leader of that team and think of the questions that you're going to use in order to run the meeting? So you just go to the meeting, most of you?
We discuss, we come up with the questions we need to answer.
Yeah, you can do that with people and how you formulate those. There's a quote on some wall as I walked around that said that a well-crafted question is halfway to the solution or something like that. I mean, it was a quote that I saw on the wall over here. Okay? So questions, you know, and there are different levels of questions. So there are questions that provoke, I'll call them negative responses. You know, questions like, well, what happened? Who did it? And you've been in those kinds of, you know, why didn't you get that done on time? Okay? There are questions that say, okay, what's working about our team? What's not working? What's missing? That's a nice level. That's at least neutral. That gets things going. And then there's the area where you say, what's possible now? We're a week into this project. We've gotten some things done. We've learned some things along the way. What's possible now? And by the way, that's the entrepreneurial question. Because in the entrepreneurial environment is chaos. It's constantly changing, and you have to be constantly adjusting. So you're always looking at what's possible now, okay, in order to move forward. You don't have, I did 7-year long-range plans for a mainframe computer company. Even there, it was ridiculous, right? But in a startup, you have maybe a month's real plan of actions until you look and see what you've learned and where you're going and, you know, what's going easy and what's really hard, and new plan, new actions. Okay. So the questions that you create, okay, are really important for changing this context. So when you look at, you know, how can we reduce gender bias, it's about some of the things and the ways that you state them. I'll tell you, if you are looking for gender bias, you will find it. I have no doubt. No doubt at all. If you are saying, as I did at one point in time, I was interviewing with a headhunter, and I wanted a particular job, and he told me for an hour why I couldn't get it. I didn't have this, and I didn't have that, and I didn't have, you know, it was all about what I'm going to call the normal career ruts that get you to be a CEO of a company. Okay? But I listened very carefully, and I wrote down everything. And when he finished, he said, what do you think? And I said, I'm the exception to your rule. I'm going to be CEO of my own company. Okay? But guess what? I listened to all the things that he said. And the next time that I wrote a cover letter to try to get a job as CEO of a startup, I used all those things in order to frame the communication. Okay? And I got an interview. They flew me to Boston from California for an interview. I started out by saying, you know, for a woman, I have a stellar career. because I knew I didn't fit the male mold. Okay? So listen very carefully to the objections and things, but shift it. You're the exception, aren't you? What else is in here? And then I'll open it for questions. Okay. Okay, another way is empowering interpretations. I know it doesn't look right, but interpretations. Okay, empowering interpretations. You can see where a lot of these things, we could come up with a more empowering interpretation about what's occurred. Okay, you can, let's say for instance that you're a manager and one day 3 people don't turn up at work and you have a report due that day. Oh dear, we're never going to be able to get this done, right? That's the normal interpretation. What's a more empowering interpretation? I heard something.
Let's get it done.
Let's get it done. Yeah, we can do it. We've got enough people. Let's get it done, right? We got enough data that they've gathered before this. Sure, they're out sick today. We can get that done, right? So instead of, well, I know I get, or I used to get hundreds of emails. I'm down to maybe 50 a day. It would say status report. Boring. It could say something like progress on da da da. Okay, it could be negative, positive, but isn't that a little more inviting? Okay, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying you're shifting the ordinary. You're shifting the way that things normally are. You're adding your intelligence and your creativity to your communications, whether they're oral or written. That's how you shift context. That's how you get a team doing things with you. You develop the questions with the team. You develop a vision for the project. The other thing is I think that this is just the way things are. Oh, I'm in a particular mood. I'm resigned that this can't get done, or I resent something that somebody did, and we think we're in that mood. Fine, acknowledge it, and say, okay, what was it I really wanted to accomplish here? And accomplish is different than do. I used to have a wonderful business partner who was on the East Coast, I was on the West Coast. We would always have a conference call on Monday morning, 9 o'clock West Coast. I would have spent Sunday night making a long list of things that I wanted to get done that week. I'd get on the phone, and dear Barbara would listen to me for about 5 minutes, and then she'd say, Linda, what is it you want to accomplish this week? That stopped me dead in my tracks because I was all about doing. It's a different question. It's a different level of question. What do you really want to accomplish, right, in your life? With an organization, on a team. Keep focused on what you want to accomplish. A lot of the to-dos are not really necessary. That's how I got rid of that perfection complex too. What do I want to accomplish? Not what do I want to do to make this perfect. So you can shift moods. You can create more empowering interpretations. Okay, so let's go back to the questions and see how we're doing. How can we impact? Got any ideas? Okay, daily things you could do, lifetime things you could do. My daughter wants someday to work in the nonprofit, but she's now a lawyer. So she just has that as a, dream. Sometimes she's staging the things that she does in life. I wish she had been a little bit better on family planning. I have 22-month-old twin boys, and they're not the best thing for her career, right? But they're wonderful little kids. Okay, so you can impact it. You can impact it with your language. You can impact it with yourself. You can impact it with others. It's not as hard as you think. People say, oh, culture. Okay, what is culture? What is an organization's culture? People say, well, I know it when I see it, but a culture is simply a series of conversations. And you can shift conversations, can't you? So you can have an impact. How does entrepreneurship and gender diversity correlate? I don't think there's any difference between a corporation and an entrepreneurial enterprise, really. That context is still the same in the background. Now sometimes, because you tend to have visionary leaders of entrepreneurial companies, sometimes they are pretty good about recognizing that diversity is important to the accomplishment of their mission. Because if they have a single focus for opinions in a dynamic environment, I don't think that works really well. So some of them understand the value, right, of diversity. Maybe a little more than large corporate people do. How do you reduce gender bias in organizations, the community, et cetera? You know, you learn to shift the conversation. The career rut that every man who had been a CEO ever, this person said had gone through this, track. I said, I'm the exception. I'm going to do it anyway. And there are many, many women today that are doing that. Okay? The careers today, how many jobs do you think you'll have before you get to retire or are retiring? More than one. Some people say, 10, 12, 15? How do you combat the perception of, because she is a woman, any ideas? I think you get results. You show them that you are a very powerful leader. And then in many cases, that woman thing drops away. I was often the only woman in the room in meetings for years and years and years. But I never went in thinking, well, they're perceiving that I'm here because I don't belong, or I didn't earn this. In most cases, I over-earned every position that I ever had. Okay? But you just, go and create results. Isn't that what it's all about anyway, is creating results? And then their opinions shift, and you can do a lot of things with language as well.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
But isn't that exactly the problem, that we have to earn more results to get the same treatment as the men? We have to earn more to get the same as the men.
Yes, it is a problem. I don't dispute.
It's just what you said, you over-earned.
I over-earned, and I think you can do it personally. I think that society, all right, has a responsibility, okay, to ensure that this doesn't continue. And there are many diversity committees and things in corporations, and it's not just personally leading in. I didn't want to leave that impression. Thank you, Gandhi, for bringing that up. It is not just about personally leading in, ladies, okay? It is about creating results, because otherwise you're not going to get ahead. But society, I think, and corporations and universities, and they're starting to step up, some of them. And I think that it's got to be two-pronged. I mean, when I did the turnaround, we had McKinsey giving us the strategic, logical stuff, and I had a leadership company helping to change the culture. Okay, so I'm not saying the way I did it is the right way, Gandhi, but it's bigger than just a single person. Yes.
And I guess I would add to that, it's not just do, but it's tell. If you look at a lot of people and what they're doing in the organization, there's some that are better at messaging what they're doing. And it doesn't mean bragging, but there was a time in which I applied for a grant, I did all of the work, and I happened to hear the senior male professor claim credit for doing the entire thing, and my jaw just dropped. And and he really thought he had done all of that. And and I realized, because I hadn't been the one messaging to other people what I had done, there was nothing to contradict him, because I hadn't told people. I've spent much of my life doing, and now I'm doing and telling, and creating those networks, creating those relationships so that they know who you are.
Right.
will help.
Right. I think you have to be vocal. I mean, I know that I used to have students come to me because I put a part of the grade on participation. And I had a student once come to me and say, I'm an introvert. So I should, it doesn't apply to me. And he sent me to a TED talk on being an introvert, okay? I gave him credit. I mean, that was a good try. But I think you have to be, you have to be a bit, you can't be invisible. You cannot be invisible, right? I mean, I think that's what you're saying. You've got to make sure that what you're doing is known about and not interpreted as bragging, right?
It's a fine line.
Right, right. And we probably have a bit of the acculturation that women have gone through in their families, et cetera, to overcome.
Directly related to that, and specifically in telling our stories, there are many studies that show that as we are framing it, women who are accomplishing things are more likely to say we and include a group of people, even if they're the primary ones doing something or even the only ones doing something. Men consistently say I, and that's part of that perception that we as women can work to change and be aware of that.
Yeah, be aware of the communications. I often see it in stuff that I'm putting together, right? And I'm debating between I and we, right? But I have that debate.
Yes.
Okay, I don't just go ahead and put the we down. I think about, well, and who is this going to, and how important is it, and how much is the team doing, and me. You also don't want to go to the other thing as your, and claim the credit for things that you're really not doing, right? So it's all about thinking. I mean, most of this is really about thinking. Yes?
Well, two questions I'll start with first is, so we're in a time period now where we're acknowledging this difference between men and women, but we're also, as women in a socioeconomic state, we come from different backgrounds, we have, like you said, different external contexts, and we're also dealing with different personalities in our team projects, in our social environments. So how do we, men or women, how do we effectively ask questions that will get the necessary response to shift the paradigm? Because if we're dealing with introverts, if we're dealing with extroverts, if we're dealing with people who are more open, other people that will keep their feelings suppressed, how can we ask those questions? In what context can we ask those questions to invoke an answer from, I know there's not a cookie cutter way to say that, but.
Well, there are lots of methods for doing that. Also, I mean, if you have someone that particularly is not coming out in meetings, right? I think, you can go and talk to them privately, okay? And then the next time that you're in the meeting, you may say, oh, Phyllis had a good idea. Shraddha had a good idea. Okay, I talked to her the other day. Shraddha, would you tell the group about it, right? So you're the one that's including. You've got the other thing too. You've got the person that monopolizes the conversation all the time. What do you do about that? Sometimes you have to hit them over the head, male or female. You tell them it's important that the rest of the team, I had probably one of the big experiences of my life, and then Gandhi, I'll go to the quiz. So I worked in this company, and I watched the president of the company and how he operated, and he was really good at finding flaws. Okay, so you get up there with the PowerPoint presentation, and this was before Excel, so it was all done by hand, right? And he would find the one error on your slide, and then he would talk about it, and people, the expression in the company was, Jack knows how to pull a thread on your sweater and your pants fall down. And I watched that, and I became really good at it, because that was the culture in that company. It did not serve me for me to follow that act. So a new president came in. Jack moved up to chair. New president came in. We're in a meeting, and I played Jack, right? I played this, find the flaw in the presentation. And we finished the meeting, and I went back to my office. And the next thing I know, the door opened, and this very tall new guy, president, walks in and closes the door. And he says to me, "You're too good to ever do that again." And he left. And I cried. But he was right. That didn't serve me. I had to find a new way. I had to find a new place to stand. Instead of standing in the corporate critic, which was really what Jack was and what I was being, I had to find a place to stand. I was on the investment committee. I was on this, I was on that. And I saw that what I really wanted was this corporation to turn around and be, and I had an image of what it would be when it was done. And every time I had to watch a presentation or make a comment on the investment in front of the organization, I went back and stood in that and said, will this make us a great company or not? So it wasn't about the little itty bitty flaws. It was really about the bigger question.